Hi students, so this is the practice prompt that you did in class, and it's a tricky one. So I'm going to go over it from the perspective of a teacher knowing all of the pitfalls. The one that Miss Ibrahim has done is pretending that she's never seen it before, seeing it raw, and how she would go through it. So you should have completed it in class, and now what I'd like to do is talk to you about the nuances that many students miss. This was a really tough prompt for students, okay? So here we go. The very first thing that you should recognize is that you cannot forget to to read the opening passage. There's all kinds of clues that will come in here. I know you're anxious and you sometimes want to rush through it, but they're giving you hints in this opening passage, so don't forget that. All right. As I read the opening passage, the key is that she grew up in the Caribbean island of Antigua before it became independent. And so the word that springs to my mind then is imperialism. That, if I was soapstoning this, would be one of my subjects. This has to be about imperialism, essentially, if they're giving me this information up here. And then I read this and go, wow, they were under England's rule until 1981? I mean, that's modern history. That is incredible to me. So then I read, and I have to look at the sentence that says what I'm actually supposed to do, and you know it's going to have two parts. It's going to have the rhetorical strategies, but then it's her attitude towards England. So you need to have a noun or an adjective that is an attitude word in your claim to meet attitude towards England. All right, so now that we know what we're looking for, attitude towards England, we're going to start reading this. And I will tell you that the biggest mistake, and this is a great cautionary tale, here's the lesson to learn. Read the whole thing all the way through so you understand the piece, right? And we've done that before. Read all the way to the end and walk away so you say, I know essentially the tone of this piece, because tone and attitude go together. And if you do that, then the trick that they set up for you in the beginning, you won't fall into that trap. So let's look at what the trap is. When I saw England for the first time, I was a child in a school sitting at a desk. The England I was looking at was laid out on a map, gently, beautifully, delicately, a special jewel. It lay on a bed of sky blue. This is an adoration mode. She has an attitude of adoration here, because a jewel is a precious thing. A jewel is expensive. A jewel is something revered. A jewel is something coveted. So you are set up in the first two sentences to fall into the trap of believing that she adores England. But if you thought of the word imperialism up here, do you really think people that lived in an imperial institution felt that way? And then, if that is a question in your mind, the rest falls into place. Before the sentence is done, she says the background on the map, it's yellow for mysterious, because though it looked like a leg of mutton, it could not really look anything so familiar as a leg of mutton. Wow, we've got that repeated. Because it was England, with shadings of pink and green, unlike any shadings of pink and green I had seen before. Squiggly veins of red, gross, running in every direction. Okay, so I have underlined all of the things that are beautiful, and then immediately after that, I have a leg of mutton repeated twice, and squiggly veins of red. And the alarm bells should be going off in your head, and you should say, I cannot buy into a tone of adoration. This is a tone of disgust. Let's talk about it. What is a leg of mutton? Mutton is the old lamb. We eat spring lamb and that's a baby sheep, and that is tender and lovely. Mutton is an old grizzly lamb that only the poorest of people would eat. And that is supported with this ugly imagery of veins of red running in every direction. There is no way that is a beautiful image. And so you have these juxtaposition immediately that should make you not buy into this tone of adoration. And let's go on in our reading of this section and see if that is validated, that it isn't adoration, it's disgust. England was a special jewel, all right, and only special people got to wear it. Wow, do you see that sarcastic tone? Sarcasm, sorry, I misspelled that. Sarcasm. All right is so sarcastic. England was a special jewel, all right, and only, again, that idea of imperialism, special people got to wear it. The people who got to wear England were English people. They, notice that she is using the pronoun they, not her, even though she lived in an English colony. She isn't English. It wore it well, and they wore it everywhere, in jungles, in deserts, on plains, on top of high mountains, on all the oceans, on all the seas, in all places where they were not welcome, in places they should not have been. This is imperialism, right? Notice this string of prepositional phrases, and that's important because she's emphasizing all of the places that they went. They are ubiquitous. England just went everywhere, and they went where they did not belong, places they should not have been. That supports her idea of disgust. So if you started to get trapped with this idea of the jewel, you have now confirmed that that may have been what she was meant to see it as, because she was a kid being given that by a teacher. But this is what she really saw it as. It's a leg of mutton with gross veins running through it, and she knows England was where they didn't belong. When my teachers had pinned this map up on the blackboard, she said, "This is England." And she said it with authority, seriousness, and adoration, and we all sat up. And there we go back to this idea of adoration. The teacher is presenting it that way, but she is seeing it differently. It was as if she had said, "This is Jerusalem, the place you go when you die, but only if you have been good." And again, here we go with this idea of religion and worship, because the teacher is obviously worshiping the nation that is controlling Antigua. We understood then, we were meant to understand then, that England was to be our source of myth and our source from which we got our sense of reality, our sense of what was meaningful, our sense of what was meaningless, and much about our own lives and much about the very idea of us headed that last list. The last list is meaningless. Well, no one wants to be told that they are meaningless. So she is disgusted. And notice you've got the juxtaposition in here of meaningful and meaningless. And it is the English people who are meaningful and the people who are subjected by the imperialism of England who are meaningless. And so this introductory paragraph clearly sets up that her attitude about England is one of resentment and disgust. And so you should absolutely have the idea of resentment in here. She is being force-fed the idea that England is superior to her through her school system. And her teacher might have presented it like a jewel, but it was not a jewel. So if we get that clarified, then all the rest of the piece falls into place. Let's talk about what else you should have picked up on. This entire paragraph is about money. And of course, that's what the larger nations used the smaller nations for. It was a place for them to sell goods, right? So this is all about them getting money and the commerce of that, and obliterating the culture of the people. And so you want to make sure you recognize that. Sorry, it is cut off on the bottom of my smartboard. So let's talk about this. She lives in Antigua, and so that is a hot climate, and she is eating this food, a cup of cocoa and porridge. Those are hot foods. Is someone who lives in a hot climate going to want a cup of cocoa? And notice how it is repeated. Can of cocoa, cup of cocoa, oh porridge. What somebody in Antigua should be eating is the beautiful mango and orange outside their back door. But they are selling the culture of England, and that means that they are obliterating the native culture, and they are getting them to buy everything that says made in England. Now you're going to see that made of England repeated again and again. These three words, made in England, made in England. And so the repetition of this is really important because it is showing how they are throwing England in their face. It's made in England, made in England, made in England. Let's talk again about how ridiculous it is that her father, for instance, is wearing a felt hat because he wanted to be the picture of an Englishman, right? So even though it's hot, he has got on his full suit, his heavy shoes, and a brown felt hat. And so he doesn't care that it's hot. He has bought into, if I want to be a proper Englishman, I have to look like a proper Englishman. I have to spend my money on all of these products that are being imported from England into Antigua. And it is ridiculous. And she recognizes it as a little kid. He's wearing the wrong hat for the climate. Of course you'd be disgusted by that. And then the tone of the piece at the end really moves. And we see this as a declaration of war. And she's repeated that as well a couple times in here. And she says, they are attacking her. Look at these words of attack. This is war. This is something she has great anger about. And she says, I am thrilled I did not know how to draw the map of England because that means they didn't beat me. They didn't win. And she says it was actually a blessing that she didn't know how to do that because she wasn't erased. Look at the repetition in here. You've got erasure as a repetition. You've got declaration of war as a repetition. And you want to recognize she is repeating this because she is hammering home her anger. This is how she was erased every single day because every breakfast, each morning, she was erased because she wasn't eating food that someone in Antigua should be eating. She was eating something that was supposed to be English because England was the goal. Okay. Lots on here. What is the takeaway? The important takeaway is that you are not suckered into a false belief in the beginning of something and then cramming everything else underneath it. When I gave you this, I said read it all the way through and understand it. You cannot understand this piece and get to the end where she talks about war and conquering and erasure and think that she adores them. You can't. Erasure is a complete obliteration, like you don't even exist anymore. And that's what she felt had happened to her culture. So it's really important, one, to read the piece all the way through and understand it. Two, it's really important that you are doing the soapstoning in your mind. And if you're coming up with the word imperialism, then you are understanding this piece much more fully than if you don't have that word. And then I want to say, you need to look at all the repetition that's in here. We've got all kinds of repetition in the idea of made in England. You've got repetition with erasure. You've got repetition with declaration of war. You've got repetition with cocoa. If you did nothing else but write your essay on repetition, you could be successful in this. You should also recognize that you've got two juxtaposed metaphors in here. You've got the metaphor of the beautiful, delicate jewel, and you've got the simile of the leg of mutton, and those are juxtaposed. And so that's a good thing to think about. I want to step back and say one more thing. If you're thinking about imperialism and you see this first metaphor of a special jewel, I want you to take that metaphor and extend it and think about it fully. Why would it be a jewel as a great metaphor? One, because jewels are expensive things and they're treasured. Two, because we think of England and the crown jewels, right? Crown jewels. And where did they get the crown jewels? They are not getting jewels from Staffordshire. They're getting jewels from Africa and India, where they colonize. So they are taking those things that, again, are back to this monetary element here, right? It's all about money, and they are associating their wealth that they stole from other countries and put into the Queen's crown, and that embodies imperialism. She is the head of everybody, and she can take what she wants from them. Okay. Look at how you can flesh these things out in detail. I really know that this was tough. You want to ask yourself, though, if you got snookered and fell into this and you wrote a claim that had to deal with adoration, you need to think about why you misread this. Was it a process thing? Was it a reading content element? What led you astray on that? And then we're going to talk more about this in class, okay? I am happy to meet with anybody at any time to sit down and do a one-on-one discussion of this if you need some more help. Thanks.